Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Congenital Heart Surgery Database User Group call. Today is Tuesday, December the 7th, 2021. So welcome, everyone. I hope you guys are having a good week and getting ready for the holiday season. I am ready, and I haven't done my shopping nearly at all, but that'll happen eventually. That'll happen. So real quick, welcome everyone again on the call with me today. Let's see here from the STS side, we have myself, Carol, Chastity, Catherine, Emily. Let's see, we also have for our surgeon leadership, we have Dr. Jacobs, Dr. Meyer, Dr. Supermanian. Core group, we have Leslie joining us. From our IQVIA team, we have Michelle, Melanie, Joe, and Jean. So thanks everyone for joining today. Just real quick, I don't have a lot of information from the STS perspective. Chastity will give a brief review on harvest, prepping for your harvest close, and just a recap of 341 stat score and updated stat score implementation. And then we'll turn things over to IQVIA for their updates. And then we'll finish with your user feedback. If you have any questions, please be sure to submit them via the Q&A button. Also, I think as usual, the raise hand function is utilized. So if you have any questions or if you need to clarify anything, just raise your hand and we'll get you unmuted. Just be sure that your microphone is enabled for that functionality. So let's go ahead and get started. STS updates, just to let you know, the December training manual is posted out on the STS website, so that is available for access and download if needed. 2021 harvest update, again, just a reminder that the harvest is set to close on Thursday, December the 23rd. Again, it's Thursday, December the 23rd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. Opt-outs are due by Tuesday, December the 28th. And the official STS communication announcing this revised harvest close date was sent back on Monday, November the 22nd. AQO update, again, just a reminder that content is available in the STS Learning Center until AQO of 2022. CE and CEU certificates are continued to be processed, and just note that this will continue until Saturday, January the 15th. So if you need to get credit, be sure and get those evaluations in no later than prior to Saturday, January the 15th. So again, just a reminder to get that information completed prior to that deadline. Also, we do have a quick COVID update. STS surgeon leadership and STS leadership and surgeon leadership did have a call last night. So just a quick COVID update, and just know that official communication from the STS will be coming out very shortly regarding this decision. So just to let you know that the surgeon leadership did decide that any COVID positive patient will continue to be excluded from the current analyses. So that includes, this 2021 and the spring 2022 analysis. So again, any COVID positive patient will continue to be excluded from analysis. Analysis exclusions will cease for any record with a surgery date of January 1, 2022 moving forward. So again, any records with the OR with a surgery date of January 1, 2022 forward will not be excluded from analysis. Also, just a reminder to continue to collect these COVID variables in 2022. Reminder, these are audited variables. So again, we do want you to continue to collect this COVID data, these COVID variables until further notice. So again, there will be a formal communication coming up from STS regarding this, the COVID exclusion update. So just look for that coming very soon. Next, also just a review of the 2022 harvest schedule that is posted on the STS website. Right now, the spring 2022 harvest is set to close on March 11th, and the fall 2022 harvest is scheduled to close on September the 16th. That's all that I have from the STS perspective for now. I'm just going to turn things over to Chastity so she can give a brief refresher for the upcoming harvest close.
Thank you, Leanne. So you saw the slide last month, but just wanted to review it again. We knew we had an extension out to December 23rd, and the message from last month was don't wait to start using your IQVIA tools and clean up your data to go ahead and get started. So again, I hope that you've already started and that you're submitting data. and have an organized approach. And so if you need some help with organization, please reach out to any of your core group members, myself included. But remember, you can be doing some internal validation of your data using specific tools that your vendor may provide. And so you can reach out to them to see if they have any reports within your database that you're able to use. You want to definitely review all of your mortalities and the fields that go into the mortality analysis. So mortality status at database discharge, mortality status at 30 days, mortality status at hospital discharge, and make sure that you have appropriate or correct answers for those, because one slip where you say yes to one of those and a patient will be marked as a mortality in the database. And so you want to make sure that you've accurately answered all of those questions. And you can also, within your own software, look at your missing data, so you know how to organize yourself when you start then implementing the IQVIA tool. So after you've uploaded your data files to IQVIA, you want to get in and look at the reports that are available to you. So your mortality eligibility summary, as well as your primary procedure mismatches. If you think that there is an error in any of those reports, or you have a question, again, submit those as a ticket to IQVIA so we can get those addressed and answered. You again want to validate your mortalities. It's a nice check between what you've submitted to IQVIA back to your internal data. And then of course, using the missing variable report. So you're able to see, especially for op types 1 and 2, what fields you have as missing. No worries. We're going to just, again, give an update on the 3.41 stat score. So next slide. So as you recall, back when 3.41 was implemented, there were 16 new procedures that were included. However, they did not have stat scores at the time of implementation. So these stat scores were released in June of 2020. And as you know, we were told that we could start coding these 16 new procedures as the primary procedure. However, unfortunately, they were not included in this current analysis report that came out in October of 2021. The analysis was not handled as expected when these procedures were done as a single procedure of a multi-component operation. However, these will be analyzed as expected in the upcoming harvest that will close on December 23rd. So on the next slide, I listed the procedures. There's nothing for you to do. If you've used any of these procedures, they will be handled as expected in this upcoming analysis. Next slide. And then coming in the spring, so the harvest that will close in March of 2022. I have a hard time saying 2022. It seems so
You and me both. You and me
right?
both. I cannot get it out.
So remember, in that harvest, we will implement the new stat scores. And so this is based on the paper that was previously published. And so you can refer to that tool, and also refer to that tool when explaining what's going to happen to your surgeons if they're not already aware or haven't read this paper. Print it off, hand it to them. But many of the current procedures in the database are going to, their stat scores are going to change, and this will happen in March of 2022. We will come to you after the first of the year with what you need to do on your end, like what will impact you as a data manager. So for now, just know that in March of 2022, the new stat scores will be implemented. And that should be all I have.
Yep, thank you. Next, we'll turn things over to Mel for our IQVIA update. Melanie?
Thanks, Leanne. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thanks and good afternoon, everyone. A couple of updates. In regards to the November updates, we did share those specific items, I believe, in the last webinar, but just wanted to share a reminder that the information from that webinar related to November updates are posted to the notification section in the platform. There were fixes that were applied for the risk-adjusted dashboard report, and also an update for the case eligibility and mortality analysis report. The full list and descriptions, again, are posted in the notifications. Next slide. And for December, we did have a release this past weekend on the 4th. and it was related to the missing variable report. The item is 7552, and this is where the denominator counts were displayed on the MVR were not accurate for the count of records for each of the variables. There were duplicate filter options that were displaying in the report, which impacted the denominator counts. That has been corrected, and you should be able to execute that report. You will see that there is a single filter for op type 1 and 2, and also a filter for other. And so that is now available. And the next slide, we do have an item that we are currently reviewing in addition to others. This one I wanted to make sure to raise to the group related to the critical summary report. The critical summary report, we are seeing that there is a discrepant number that's showing for the total number of records that has been submitted. That is just a display issue. It is not impacting your actual records. The submission total is reflected on your uploader history card. So once that uploader file has processed, you'll see that there is a history card that appears. That number is correct. And on the critical summary report, it is showing an increased number in the total number that has been submitted. So we are actively working on that, but we just wanted to make sure that you are aware that there's no impact to the total number of records that you have submitted. We will post another update related to this within the notifications once we have that updated. And the next slide. And of course, any tickets that have been submitted to us, we are currently reviewing and are targeting for any items that should be released in the next upcoming release, which will be in the time frame of, we still have another release for December, and then of course we'll have another one in January. Okay, and of course, if there's any updates related to those, our support team members will reach out to you to notify.
Great,
and I believe that's it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Melanie, Ruthie had a question about the revised report, new data calculations, and that was just released with those November updates that you had just referred to, and that announcement was posted into the notifications.
That is correct.
Yep, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mel. Thank you, Mel. All right, so just a friendly reminder for any analysis report questions, again, just please reach out to IQVIA support. You can use STS tech support at IQVIA.com, or you can also use this email address, CHSD tech support at IQVIA.com. Either way, those emails will go directly to CHSD tech support. And as always, STS and DCRI will be looped in as needed when those tickets are escalated up to tier 2 for assistance. My contact information, you all are very familiar with this. Also, just a reminder for database operational questions, please reach out to STSDB at sts.org. If you have any invoice related questions, I think invoices were sent out recently. So if you have any questions related to those invoices, you could just reach out to STSDB at sts.org. Jane and her team can assist with any of those questions. Also, let's see here, upcoming webinars so you can schedule accordingly. Our next user group call is January 11 at 2 p.m. Central Time, and our next monthly webinar is January 18th at 12 p.m. Central Time. And again, STS Marketing will send out reminders the day prior to those webinars that those webinars will be forthcoming. So again, mark your calendars for January 11th and January the 12th accordingly. That's all that I have at this time. I do see some questions coming in, and hi Ruthie, I see you've got your hand raised as well as Nancy. Hold on, let me unmute you. And I see your comment that STS had also sent a notification, not just on the IQVIA platform. And I agree, we will work with marketing there to get that information out. I have unmuted you there if you want to. Looks like you're double muted. I've unmuted you if you want to.
Hi, can you guys hear
Ruthie.
me?
Yes, ma'am.
No, thank you guys. No, I'm going to tell you why, because I had no idea, because I hadn't gone on IQVIA yet because I was so busy. And so I had no idea that the report was released till Rom told me. So I think if I would have gotten an email from you guys, I would have been like, oh, I need to go check my report. That was it.
Yep, we'll work. I know marketing is super slant. Yeah, I'll work with them to see if we can get just an updated quick blurb out I wish I could send it all quickly directly to you guys, from my email, but I will have to work with marketing to get that information out. But yes, I agree with you. We can get a quick blurb sent out just to notify everyone's, in case, like you said, not everyone will check that notifications tab. So happy to work with them to get that done, Ruthie. Let's see here. All right, Nancy has a question. Oh, Kelly, real quick, I just want to address your question. Are tax ID numbers required for submission? Mel, are those? Are those critical errors? I can't remember off the top.
They're errors.
I'm sorry.
I believe those are errors,
Okay.
not
Yeah,
critical. It
right,
won't prevent the file from coming in.
Right. So, Kelly, obviously, if you have that information, we want you to submit that information. But again, if you, it's, as Melanie stated, it's not a critical error that will keep your file from being uploaded. But again, obviously, we want you to collect that information if you do have that information, and submit that. All right, Nancy. I can't hear you. Okay. I can't hear you, Nancy. I don't know if you may want to try and type your question into the Q&A. I see Kelly also has her hand up. Hi, Kelly.
Hi. I had a question about the stat category changes. So I wasn't able to attend the conference, but I went back and watched the videos and the webinars. So my understanding, and Chastity, thank you for bringing that up in your PowerPoint presentation, that the changes will be implemented with the spring 2022 analysis, correct?
Right.
Right. Okay. So it will not, these changes will not be retroactive, right? You will not be applying these to historical data.
Well, yeah, they will be. So in 2022 analysis, the new STAT scores will be applied in that analytic window. So those procedures for that 4-year window will have the new STAT scores applied.
So they will change.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. And that's what I told leadership. And my question is, how will this impact the veracity of historical publications, data, outcomes? And our reports will not match our internal data for 4 years. That's correct as well?
Well, as it pertains to the stat scores, your software will likely have the old stat scores unless your vendor would update the stat scores within your software in March. But come 6.22 go live in July, they would be updated by your vendor. So it wouldn't be 4 years based on the stat score implementation. The unmatching of your data for 4 years would likely be related to the new combination codes, which we'll talk about absolutely later. But I think that if your vendor isn't going to update software, which they're not required to update your software by March, then you will have to live from March until the implementation of 6.22, which is July 1, with different stat scores in your software. Does that make sense?
It does. So it's just vendor specific as to whether or not we can get these changed. It's not something the STS can say these need to be changed, and they won't. There is no leeway as to waiting until the version implementation in 6.22.
Well, this is Dr. Meyer. I think, and the position I've relayed to our department here in Boston is, the reports may or may not be comparable. What was a stat 5 might all of a sudden have a lower risk score. And so you may not get, quote unquote, the same credit as, you would have for the same case, or you may get more credit. And so I think one of the risks in doing this is, it becomes an apples to oranges comparison if you're trying to compare your, performance or whatever you want to call it, from that report to one from 2 years ago. So there's not only whatever changes have happened actually internally with your case mix, but also recognize that the way that each case is being treated is going to change, or at least might change.
Right.
So I think the issue about comparability and how do you compare where you were now compared to where you were 2 years ago, I think is going to be difficult. And I think that's a risk of doing this. But on the other hand, if you had an operation that had a 10% mortality, in 2009, and now it's got a 3% mortality, it probably shouldn't be given the same risk weighting. At least that's the way I've thought about it. I don't know, am I incorrect in any way, Ram or Jeff?
No, Dr. Meyer, I completely agree with you. I think using these new stat scores, these are empirically driven, data-driven, derived specific stat scores. They provide additional veracity to both the data analysis and to the risk model. So I completely agree with Dr. Meyer. I think there is a small risk that internally it may not match, but that's a small price to pay for overall having a better risk model and risk stratification.
Hey, it's Leslie, real quick. We also did ask, I don't know timing or anything like that, but we did ask that IQVIA help to provide a report for where there are changes prior to that March deadline.
Right.
So that we can go back and update your local records with what the new primary procedure would be in case that should happen. But of course, for our rules and exceptions for the benchmark procedures, that's going to stay the same. It's really the scoring that might affect it for a small proponent of our procedures.
Yes, and we'll discuss that on the January webinar because the primary procedure mismatch report within IQVIA will update using the new stat scores, and data managers will be able to go in and update their primary procedures.
And so how far back is this change going again? How many
The
years
analysis
back?
will be done on a 4-year analytic window.
Right.
So stat scores will change back to, how far back are they going with the stat score changes? Or am I not?
So the spring 2022 harvest will include the analytic period of January 1, 2018 through 12/31/2021.
So they're going to change the stat categories back to 2018.
Right. Those new scores will be applied to those procedures that fall into that analytic period, to that analytic window.
Okay. Okay. So, so any historical data or analysis that we want to do for outcomes or historical publications, it's really going to impact the veracity of those, correct?
Maybe I can explain that better, Kelly. This is Ram from CHLA. So all the data analytics are done based on the currently utilized stat scores. So all the analyses and all the risk stratification that utilizes stat scores have complete veracity as of the current existing stat scores. We periodically reevaluate the stat scores based on more contemporary data. So whenever a publication was put forth in the literature, it reflects the stat scores based on contemporary data at the time of that publication. So moving forward, now that we have a new peer-reviewed publication with new stat scores, starting from the spring 2022 harvest, we're going to use for whatever that 4-year analytical window is, stat scores derived from contemporary data. So they will continue to have high fidelity and veracity with respect to contemporarily available data. Nothing published in the past becomes incorrect or wrong. They were just utilizing contemporary data-driven contemporary stat scores. I hope I made that clear.
Yes. Yeah.
Very much.
Yes. Yep. Thank you. And then I have one more question about the participant user file requests for data. I had reached out to DCRI because of those, I think it was 16 procedures that were not analyzed with this current harvest. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
Right.
they said that they were going to continue to let people request data for the participant user files. And my concern is those procedures were not analyzed. Is that going to affect any research?
Kelly, let me reach out to the research center that handles the PUF requests.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how to answer that for you at this time.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll have to reach out to Robert and his team at the research center that handles the PUF requests to see.
Okay.
I don't work with DCRI directly with those
Sure.
PUF requests and communication. So I'll have to, if you could shoot me an email, and then we can work separately offline with the research center and DCRI on PUF request specifics.
That's fine. I don't have a PUF request per se. My concern is that we have various clinicians that do research and request data, and my concern is that those data are not valid.
Well, they're valid
Valid.
relative to what the data were at the time they were collected. But, if they're looking at more current data, or they want to use the newest and most up-to-date risk adjustment scheme, then you are correct. The results, I'm not sure I would say right or wrong, but they're going to be different, at least potentially, than what you would have, gotten for information using the older risk adjustment system. I mean, this is
Well,
the whole risk adjustment system has always been in a little bit of evolution, because every time we add a new procedure, then the database is structurally slightly different than what it was previously. And
Yeah.
so that's why I made the comment. I mean, now we're really, this is a little bit bigger a change that would come about. And I would argue that we might want to even make a few additional tweaks to this before we actually implement it, but that we'll deal with in another forum. But, it means that, if you were doing better than expected now, and all of a sudden you're doing worse than expected or as expected, it might just be because we changed the risk adjustment system. And so this is going to require a lot of sort of digging around and understanding your data and your case mix, and, really trying to be sure that, you're not misled by whatever the headline thing is, as expected, better than expected, whatever. But, what actually happened on a case to case comparison, in one era, with old risk adjustment versus current era with new risk adjustment. I mean, it's not going to be so straightforward. And that's why I made the comment that they're not exactly going to be comparable. And one just has to be aware of that. And so, if something looks different, then it's going to take a little work to figure out, is it because we're doing better, or is it just because the risk adjustment system changed?
I'm sorry, Dr. Meyer, I should clarify. I wasn't referring to the risk adjustment system with the participant user file. I was referring to the 16 procedures that were left out of analysis that we're going to now analyze for this next harvest report.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
No, but I mean, that's true. The same statement could be applied for both. The new, the addition of these 16 procedures is number one, but then number two, the entire analysis, when we're perhaps giving a different risk weighting to the same operation in the new, method versus the old method, that may make the data look different too.
Kelly, too, those 16 procedures were not left out of analysis, but they weren't handled as expected and they were handled differently. So they should still be there. But I think the communications that came out from STS was that affected 0.02%, if I'm not mistaken, of the procedures.
That is correct. So thank you for bringing that up, Leslie. I want to really, really stress on two things that are important in what Leslie said and what Dr. Meyer said. They're both very important points. First, the 16 procedures accounted for a total of 507 total procedures in this entire calculation of, it came down to less than 0.5%. So it impacted a very small overall percentage of procedures. I recognize that for certain individual center, that percentage may be different, more or less, depending on how often those 16 procedures were undertaken at the center. But at the database level, it impacted a very, very small number of procedures. Leslie, thank you for bringing that up. And to go back to what Dr. Meyer said, so all the data managers are very clear. Remember that the stat score and the stat categories are used more frequently to risk stratify the procedures in the congenital heart surgery database. That is, we say, you did so many procedures in stat 1, so many procedures in stat 2, so many procedures in stat 3. Those numbers will change because individual procedures change stat scores and consequently can change stat categories. The stat score itself forms a small part of the risk model. The stat score is a variable in the risk model, but it is what we call an auxiliary variable. That is, it does not directly affect the logistic regression equation, it indirectly affects it. And I don't want to go into the statistics, one, because I'm certainly not an expert at it, and two, this is not probably the forum for it. But I anticipate that this will impact the risk model, but if I'm allowed to guess, which I never should, I'm still going to, it's probably going to impact the risk model less than it's going to impact the risk stratification. So rest assured, we're going to dot every I and cross every T to make sure that the programming is done as best as possible as we utilize and transition to the new stat scores. And like Dr. Meyer said, we have task force meetings to discuss additional tweaking because our goal is to have the best process forward so all the data are analyzed correctly, continuing to move forward.
Okay, my last question then is something going to come out from the STS that we can take to leadership about these changes that are very clear and concise. Because when I took this to leadership, they were extremely taken aback by that statement that these changes would affect historical data and we would not be able to have a comparison internally.
So you're asking for an official statement with the upgrade, with the implementation of the stat scores?
I think I get it. I think I get it. You just want to know, you want to have something from the STS that says that, because we've changed the risk model, it is certainly possible that, the results that were presented back to the center based on the old risk model might look different for the new risk model, right? And so because of the change in all of the risk stratification and the stat score risk scores, which in turn affect the stat categories, it's going to be a little hard to compare, or at least might be hard to compare, your last STS report with the new one that comes out with using an updated and we believe more correct methodology. Right? Do I understand that correctly? That's what you're looking for, some statement to that effect?
Yes. When I told them that the stat categories, the changes were going to be applied to historical retrospective data, there was quite a bit of doubt and surprise with that. They were very surprised to hear that.
Well, I mean, so,
that they
Let's think
almost
about-
did not believe that that was going to happen. So I think,
okay,
and I don't know how other centers, what their leadership looks like or how they've brought this to leadership. But it would be nice to have a something from the STS that we could all as data managers take to leadership about the stat categories being applied retrospectively, the new combination scores, the fact that vendors are not going to be required to make the changes for that, 6-month period.
Yeah, the new stat scores are being released to the vendors with the 622, which it is in July.
Right, so there's that, March to July period
Yeah.
where it's up to the vendors. I think it would be helpful for us to have that to take back to leadership. So we're very clear and we're giving them the correct message.
Kelly, thank you for saying that. I will take that question. So I think there is a little communication gap here. So Dr. Meyer is right. I think it makes sense for us to try and put something in writing. So it's clear to the leadership. But there's also a question in the Q&A session, and I want to use all of that to clearly, to maybe try and make this more clear to this audience. So when we use, I want to use different terms so we don't get lost in retrospective use of the data. We're going to go back and use it and so on and so forth. I don't want to use terms like that. Here is how I'm going to frame this. We reevaluated the stat mortality score that is assigned to all the individual procedures that are part of the STS congenital heart surgery database. During our recent data-driven reevaluation, so this is not consensus, this is not experts giving it a score. We actually went back and statistically analyzed the mortality that is observed for these procedures in our database and assigned them statistically what we think is more accurate stat mortality scores. These scores will be utilized in the data analysis starting from spring 2022. That means in spring 2022, the analysis would include a 4-year period. These stat scores will only be utilized for that 4-year period. We're not going to go back to 2016 or 2017 or 2018 data and rerun them. For the 4-year window, for which we would have anyway run the analytics in spring 2022, we will utilize for that analysis these new stat scores. So yes, they are retrospective in that they will go for a 4-year period, some procedures of which were previously analyzed using a different stat score. But in all other words, our entire data analyses, by definition, they are retrospective because they look at 4 previous years of data harvest period. So in that form, nothing will change. And I think that answers the Q&A. Nothing will change from the data manager perspective per se. I will qualify that statement in a second. Whatever data you've already put in. It's great. The primary procedure assignment may change because certain procedures had a change in their stat score. The stat categories for the procedures, which only matter in the analysis, will likely change because we found a lot of procedures that change stat score and stat mortality. But from an analytical perspective, we anticipate this to be a more accurate statistical analysis. And I will also finish by stating that the impact on the risk model itself, I anticipate will not be overwhelming. Because again, like I said, the stat score is a part of the risk model, but only as an auxiliary variable. To give an example, mechanical ventilation preoperatively, if that changed, that would impact the risk model way more than this improvement in the stat score assignment. I hope I made that clear. This is just, we're only changing the stat scores for the current analysis based on more contemporary data. We're not going to have people go back and change anything because this is only at the analytical level. I hope I made that clear.
Right, very much so. And I appreciate that. So it will go back for that 4-year analytical window back to 2018. So I'm going to give you an example that I would have to take to leadership. If I had a patient in 2018 that had a mortality that was a stat 2, and now with these changes, they are now a stat 5, which I don't know if that will happen or not. My stat 5s are mortality is going to look a lot higher than it actually would have in historical reports. And I understand the need for the change, but these are things I'm going to have to take back to leadership.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. It works
Correct.
both ways.
Correct.
A procedure that used to be a stat 3, for example, a straight up arterial switch operation, is now a stat 2 procedure. So if someone had a mortality in stat 3, now that mortality will go down to stat 2 only in unadjusted analysis.
Correct.
Right? Such as in table 18, where we just give you breakdown based on individual procedures. Yes, that will change. However, I anticipate that because the expected and observed mortality, because the current stat scores are a better reflection of contemporary observed mortality, its impact on your O/E ratio, while there may be some, I'm hoping will not be so overwhelming for you to have to explain it. But if that happens, it happens because it is more statistically contemporaneous and accurate. I think that's the message we want to continue to provide is this is based on more contemporary, recent, current practical data from the database. So yes, you're right, Kelly, and that may be the intended consequence.
Okay. Well, I will tell you, I will have to explain it, whether they're minor changes or significant changes. So if the STS could pull together some communication, I know that I would appreciate it. I'm going to speak for the other data managers, that they would probably appreciate it as well. And then I just had one more comment. The report that I printed out says that it is a risk adjusted report. My understanding is only table 16 is risk adjusted. And when I have people review this report, I have to continuously explain to them the entire report is not risk adjusted. So if we can just take that verbiage off of the report, is that possible?
Kelly, that's something that we would have to review with IQVIA.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, we'll add that to the list, Mel.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. I know McCall's had her hand raised for a while, so I wanted to go ahead and allow her to ask her questions. McCall, you should be unmuted.
Hi, thank you. So in regard to the STAT 2020, I think in the last time that I looked at the list, there are some procedures that still don't have a new stat score. Is that correct? And if yes, are you gonna assign new stat scores to it before spring 2022?
Yes, ma'am, we are. That process is undergoing right now. I'm going to discuss that in tonight's task force call. We anticipate to have every procedure that's capable of being a primary procedure. We anticipate to provide them all stat scores. Yes.
Okay, so thank you. That's helpful. And then I would like to echo Kelly, and I think if STS can communicate with the surgeons and the centers directly, it will be very helpful. So we're not in the middle of it. And then just, another question, what's the rush to do the changes with the STAT 2020 in March before the upgrade? Why can't we wait until we have the upgrade of 6.2022 and have the vendors implement it and do it in a more thorough way?
Leanne, I'm happy to take that question.
Sure, absolutely.
The interesting point there is that to me, other than at the vendor programming level, there is no scientific connection between the 2020 stat scores and version 6.22. To be clear, the 2020 stat scores were derived based on data that were collected in the current version of the data collection form anyway. So there really is no synergy or relationship between the upgrade process and the STAT 2020 scores. The two just happened to come out around the same time. There was no intention to run them together. So to me, from a database perspective, I don't see a reason to tie the two. More importantly, now that we have more accurate contemporary STAT scores, the task force as a whole believes that it is imperative for us to start utilizing more contemporary data as soon as the programming can be done. So that's sort of, I don't want to use the word rush, that's sort of the urgency, that's sort of the necessity is to use more contemporary data, because we want our risk model and risk stratification to reflect as close to accurate as possible, given the statistical limitations.
Okay, thank you. And then the last comment I really have to say, because we were really hurt by not including the 16 procedures, and it is not including because it's not, they're not there, and some of our procedures are totally screwed with how they are described in the new reports. So I know we are probably the only center that was hurt that much, but they were excluded. And if we knew it, I would have recoded them just as I did several times during these years. But to put a PA reconstruction, assign it to a PFO closure of 16 hours operation, it's very misleading. So
Understood.
Yep. We agree.
All right.
thank you.
Oh, no, thank you, McCall. All right, let's see here. Angie had a question. What is the best way to find out which procedure was counted as primary for an operation by DCRI in their analysis? Angie, the quickest way to do that, the best is to email tech support. So you would just reach out to CHSD tech support at IQVIA.com, and Mel and her team can work with you to identify which procedure was identified as primary on the DCRI side. They have access to that data set, and they would be able to assist you with that.
We did, Leanne,
yeah,
just to chime in, we do have an enhancement that did come in related to having that information within the report. So we are reviewing that so that you're at least able to be able to see that information. So just know that that's in the pipeline.
Yep. All right, thanks, Melanie. Is there a list available of the procedures whose stat scores will be changing with the implementation of the stat score updates? Just the list of the procedures that are changing, not the whole list. So the paper is available and out there right now. I'm working on, so once all the stat scores in the task force tonight, we're working to, as Dr. Subramanian indicated, assign stat scores to those procedures that do not have a stat score at this time. I will have an updated Appendix C available and posted out on the STS website for you all. So that will be coming very soon. And that list will also include those combination procedure codes. I know, Nicole, you had asked about the combo codes. So again, those combo codes are listed in that paper, in that appendix. They're laid out very nicely, those new 5,000 codes. So, but all of that information will be updated, and Appendix C will be updated and posted out on the STS website once it is finished. So that information will be coming. When will the specs be released to the vendors? So we are working on the 6.22 spec build right now. We are having daily calls, STS and IQVIA. We're having marathon calls each day. Our goal is to have those, the status specs into the database, into the Access database by the end of this month. So the plan is to get those specs out to vendors starting in January. So coming soon, we're working hard, Heidi. So as a list of the stat category and stat procedure changes posted, no, that list is not available yet, but the paper is available out there. So if you do want to see The stat scores, the paper is out there. You can access that paper, and Dr. Jacobs and others have the list of all the stat scores that are coming.
Yeah, I think, doesn't it, my recollection is it contains a table that
Yes.
shows old and new for
Yes.
every procedure.
Yes, sir, it sure does.
And wasn't it uploaded at AQO? I think it was one of the materials that were uploaded.
Okay. And Angie, you have the ticket number. Angie, so Melanie and her team can look into that. You were told they were not able to answer the question. They should be able to look into that. So Melanie, do you have this ticket number here from Angie that you all could, Jean and her team could look into?
I will grab it now.
Thank you, my friend. Got you, Angie. And so the slides, Nicole, will be posted, so you have access, to this, to the link for the article here, and so you can get that from the website. And it's already posted on a previous webinar as well. So it will take about a day or two for our marketing team to get this recording posted. So if you want to go out there and grab it real quick, if you haven't gotten it already, it is currently posted in a previous presentation from our monthly call that was held right before this one. All right, and that's all that I have. Let's see, anybody else have a question? I see another hand raised. Janet. Sorry, Janet, I didn't see your hand. You should be unmuted.
That's okay. I don't know if that stat thing that I made for AQO is accessible now that we switched to the STS for review of the AQO stuff. So a few people have emailed me about that.
Okay. Yes, it should still be out there under the resources, I think, in the STS Learning Center. The AQO, everything from AQO was moved over. But again, I will have a more updated spreadsheet with those newer codes once the task force gets everything assigned. So I do plan to see if I can get an updated version of that posted, Janet, for everyone. So with all the information out there. So it's in progress. Okay, Kelly, you didn't see it in the resources? Okay. So it may not be out there. So I'll have to check with Megan and her team from the STS Learning Center. But again, I am working on updating that spreadsheet. So again, it will be coming, and the spreadsheet does have, as Janet had included, and initially the current score with the new updated score. So it is in progress, and I will have that for you all, that updated version. Let's see here, Janet, Heidi. Heidi, you should be unmuted, Heidi.
Hey, Leanne.
Hi.
I'd asked a question up above, and I was wondering if there's going to be any kind of cross analysis performed in regard to the old risk adjustment and the new risk adjustment, simply for the sake, even if for science, to see what the contrast comparison is.
Again,
go ahead, Dr. Subramanian.
Again,
Yep, go ahead.
No, so again, to be very clear, what changes the stats score, not the risk model. The stats score is part of the risk model, but what goes into the risk model has not changed. That wasn't a reanalysis. The question you asked is exactly how this paper was done. So that's actually what was done. We went back into the data set for the contemporary, I think 10 years worth of data, reanalyzed them utilizing the current data set to identify mortality, and then used spline curves to actually come up with these new stat scores and consequent stat categories. So it wouldn't make sense at this point to use older stat categories which are no longer relevant based on current statistical analyses back again into this analysis.
Understood.
It's a long sentence, but
right. I don't think
sorry,
I picked up on the fact that you had already performed retrospective 10 years analysis with the new process in contrast to the old. So that makes more sense.
Right. So again, just to be clear, we used 10 years data, collected observed mortalities, and then plotted them on a curve and figured out using statistics what stat score to give them and what stat category to put them into. and then compared them to the existing stat scores and stat categories, and a subset of procedures changed their stat scores and stat categories. That's how this paper was written, just
That
to make
makes
sure.
a lot more sense.
Ram-
Thank you for clarifying that.
Ram is absolutely right. And in fact, in addition to that, in the paper, there's tables that show where each operation would exist in the Stat 2009 system and in the Stat 2020 system. So those comparisons were done as part of this analysis, and they're published in the manuscript. It's just one of the data tables in the manuscript. Actually, it's data table 5, comparison of old stat mortality category versus new stat mortality category.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you. That clarification was exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi.
I want to say one other thing. We're getting into the holiday seasons, and I just wanted to say that, this is really hard stuff we're all working on, but we should take a step back, take a breath, and say thank you to the people who are doing most of this work, like Leanne and Carol and Chastity and the STS team and the IQVIA team. This is a group of people that are really working very, very hard to get all of this right, and they're putting in, hundreds of hours to do so. So I think maybe just I would just say happy holidays to everybody, and thank you guys for all your hard work.
Thank you. We couldn't do it without you guys, so thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you for your patience as we work through all of this. It's a lot of work, and it's as you all know, very stressful, and we couldn't do it without our surgeon leaders and our core group members and our data managers. So thank you guys very much. All right. Well, we are at the hour. It is 2:00 Eastern time. So man, that was a great call. Dr. Subramanian, Dr. Jacobs, Dr. Meyer, thank you so much for being on this call today. I think you guys being here helped tremendously and provided some phenomenal information to the data managers. So I greatly thank you for taking time out of your day to be on these calls with us. Again, we couldn't do it without you. So thank you, everyone. Happy holidays, everyone. If you have any questions or anything else that you need to discuss, please feel free to reach out to me directly. You have my contact information. With that, again, thank you, everyone, for being on the call, and I appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a great holiday. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy holidays to all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.